Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're diving into some significant attention that's been focused recently on Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, quite a bit going on.
We've got a really interesting mix of sources, actually, and they shed light on, well, two main areas. First, there's this ethics review connected to her going to the Met Gala back in 2021.
Right, the big fashion event.
Exactly.
Okay.
And second, we'll explore some of the discussions and, frankly, allegations around how she approaches immigration issues.
Okay, so the goal here really is to get past the headlines, right?
Absolutely. Understand the core stuff, separate the facts from maybe speculation.
Yeah, we're aiming for a clear, concise overview. We've got the Office of Congressional Ethics report on the gala,
Okay.
news articles covering that, and her arrest at an abortion rights protest,
Right.
a YouTube transcript that analyzes her immigration stance, and even a Reddit thread digging into potential legal ramifications.
Lots to unpack.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so first up, the Met Gala. The Office of Congressional Ethics, the OCE, they looked into whether Representative Ocasio-Cortez accepted gifts that weren't, well, permissible.
Things she shouldn't have accepted, basically.
Right, in relation to her attending the event. This was September 13th, 2021.
And she was there with her partner, Riley Roberts.
Correct, as guests of Vogue.
Okay. And we're not talking small gifts here, are we?
No, not at all. The OCE report lists a couture dress, handbag, shoes, jewelry, all from Brother Valley's.
Wow.
And Mr. Roberts, her partner, he got a bow tie and shoes.
And it wasn't just clothes, right? There were services, too.
Yeah, hair, makeup, transportation, even access to a ready room, all provided.
Okay, so quite a package of benefits.
Definitely. Now, here's where it gets, well, complicated.
Yeah.
Representative Ocasio-Cortez stated she always intended to pay for these things personally.
Okay.
And she said a campaign staffer was tasked with handling the payments.
Oh,
But the OCE report, it highlights that the payments for all these goods and services, they didn't actually happen until after the OCE started its review.
So the timing is the issue.
Exactly. It's not just that the payments were late, it's the appearance, potentially accepting significant benefits without paying for them right away. That's what ethics rules are trying to prevent.
Right, you can see why that would trigger a review. The timeline really paints a picture, like the hair services bill. Almost $480 from September 2021.
Yeah. When was that paid?
Not until February 2022, and apparently only after repeated demands for payment and even a threat of a labor complaint.
Oof. Okay. What else?
Makeup services, similar story. Invoiced around $345 in September 21. Lots of overdue notices. Finally paid in March 2022, and that was after an initial payment attempt was rejected.
So delays and difficulties across the board. What about the Brother Valley stuff, the actual clothes and accessories?
That's also quite notable. The first bill was over $2,200. Then it was revised down to about $990.
For rental mostly, or purchase?
It seems like rental for the gown, handbag, jewelry, but purchasing the shoes? But even that revised amount wasn't paid until March 2022.
And the reason given?
Well, the campaign staffer apparently cited not getting a final invoice and thinking there might be more charges coming.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is once the OCE started looking into it, even more unpaid stuff from Brother Valley's surfaced, almost $5,600 worth.
Seriously, what was included in that?
Car service, use of a room at the Carlisle Hotel.
For both of them?
For both Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Mr. Roberts, yeah. Plus his shoes and bow tie.
And when was that paid?
Not until May 2022. And even the $180 for transport from her home to the hotel, that wasn't paid till May 2022 either.
Wow. So these are significant delays for substantial amounts. What was the official explanation?
Representative Ocasio-Cortez called it deeply regrettable. She said she'd followed up with her staffer, who told her they were waiting on a revised invoice.
Okay.
She claimed she wasn't fully aware of just how much was unpaid until right before her OCE interview.
And the staffer?
The staffer acknowledged the payment requests kind of fell off her radar, saying other tasks took priority.
Right. So given all the value of the items, the long delays, the payments only happening after the review started, what did the OCE conclude?
They found substantial reason to believe that she had accepted impermissible gifts.
Okay.
And so they recommended further review by the House Committee on Ethics. They also noted that some key people, like Aurora James from Brother Valley's and another individual, Jana P., didn't cooperate with their review.
Oh.
Yeah, they recommended subpoenas be issued to get their testimony.
Okay, so it's potentially moving to the next stage. Now, what about this charity event exception? I remember that being mentioned.
Right. Her lawyers argued that because the Met Gala is a fundraiser for a nonprofit, the Metropolitan Museum, which is a 501(c)(3, her attendance should fall under that exception to the gift rules.
Makes sense on the surface.
And they reiterated she always meant to pay for the attire and services herself.
So did the OCE buy that argument?
Well, they sort of acknowledged parts of it. They said, okay, maybe Vogue could be seen as an event organizer, even though they issued the invite, which could potentially fit the exception. And they even stretched the definition of spouse to include her long-term partner for the purpose of the exception.
So where did it fall apart then?
It really came down to the payments, or lack thereof. The OCE basically determined that the charity exception typically covers free attendance, like the ticket itself.
Gotcha. Not thousands of dollars in couture, services, hotel rooms.
Exactly. Especially when those things weren't paid for months and months until an ethics review was breathing down their neck. That prolonged non-payment of substantial benefits is what led them to recommend further scrutiny.
Okay, that clarifies the Met Gala situation quite a bit. Lots of detail there.
Yeah, it's all about the specifics of the House rules and the timeline.
So now let's shift gears. We need to look at this other area, drawing a lot of attention about her stance and actions on immigration.
Right. A very different kind of scrutiny.
One thing mentioned was her holding these online Know Your Rights forums. What was the focus there?
Primarily informing constituents about their constitutional protections. Things like protections against illegal search and seizure.
Standard civics, you might think?
Well, yes, but it drew criticism, notably from a former Trump administration official. The suggestion was that providing this info could, potentially, help people who are in the country without legal status.
So the criticism wasn't about the information itself, but who might be using it and why.
Pretty much. The core of that criticism seemed to be whether informing everyone of their rights, regardless of status, crosses a line into, well, hindering immigration enforcement.
Which is a really complex and, frankly, politically charged question.
Absolutely.
How did Representative Ocasio-Cortez respond to that?
She stated her job is to educate and act as a liaison for critical information to all her constituents. She emphasized she was informing them of their constitutional rights. Period.
Okay. Then there were also these allegations involving a former campaign staffer.
Yeah, this came up in some reports and commentary. The story was about an individual who came to the U.S. as a child, apparently overstayed a visa, worked on her campaign,
Right.
and then later moved to Colombia, reportedly expressing frustration with the slow pace of immigration reform in the U.S.
Okay, but where did the allegations come in?
Well, a commentator on YouTube took it further. They alleged this situation amounted to illegal hiring. And they questioned how this staffer was paid, even suggesting, sort of speculating, about the possibility of a fake Social Security number being used. Though that seems like pure speculation based on the source.
Right. Important to distinguish documented facts from commentary or speculation there. And this YouTube source also mentioned webinars.
Yes, focusing on advice Representative Ocasio-Cortez shared online about what to do if encountered by ICE.
Like what kind of advice?
Things like verifying the ICE agent's identity, documenting the encounter, taking notes, maybe video, and sharing that info with support networks.
Seems like practical advice in a potentially stressful situation.
It does, but the critics on that YouTube platform framed it differently. They describe it as instructing undocumented immigrants on how to evade law enforcement. And they went so far as to claim that giving such instructions could itself be a federal crime.
Again, a very specific interpretation of her actions.
Exactly. Now, slightly related to facing criticism and legal situations, remember that incident where she was arrested?
At the abortion rights protest near the Supreme Court?
Yep.
July 2022?
That's the one. She was arrested for blocking First Street. Afterwards, some social media posts went viral claiming she was pretending to be arrested.
Oh, I remember seeing that. What was the reality?
Fact checkers confirmed the arrest was absolutely real. Capitol Police reports confirmed it, and she even posted her own arrest paperwork and the fine she paid on Instagram.
Okay. So why the pretending claim? Was it because she wasn't handcuffed in some photos?
That seems to be the basis, yeah. The Capitol Police actually clarified that those arrests were non-custodial, which means they typically don't handcuff for that type of offense.
Makes sense.
And Representative Ocasio-Cortez herself explained why she had her hands behind her back. She said it's just standard practice when you're detained, handcuffed, or not.
To avoid escalating things.
Right, to avoid any potential additional charges, like resisting arrest, even unintentionally.
Got it. Okay, so that clears up the arrest narrative. Now, finally, this Reddit discussion you mentioned. What was the focus there?
It was exploring whether she could actually face legal charges for her immigration advocacy work.
Based on the kinds of criticisms we just discussed.
Exactly. Some Redditors brought up congressional immunity, the idea that her actions might be protected because they're part of her official job.
But others disagreed.
Yeah, others countered that advising undocumented immigrants might fall outside the scope of her official duties, especially since they aren't, voting citizens she directly represents in the traditional sense. It's a gray area.
And they talked about the speech or debate clause. How does that fit in?
Right. That clause protects members of Congress from prosecution for their legislative acts like speeches on the floor or votes. The debate on Reddit was basically, do her immigration forums and advice count as protected legislative activity, or are they something else? Some users even floated the idea that her actions could maybe be seen as obstruction of justice.
Wow, that's a serious claim.
Very serious. But others strongly pushed back, arguing that just informing people of their existing rights isn't illegal and definitely doesn't meet the standard for obstruction.
So the key point of disagreement on Reddit seemed to be whether these actions were part of her official job as a representative or something outside of that protection.
Precisely. That was the crux of the debate online.
Okay, so pulling this all together then, on one hand, we have the Met Gala situation. The OCE report raises pretty significant questions about potential ethics violations, mainly due to those really delayed payments for substantial benefits.
Yeah, that seems fairly clear-cut in terms of the OCE's findings, even if the final judgment rests with the Ethics Committee.
Right. And then separately, you have her approach to immigration, which has drawn both strong support from some and really intense criticism from others.
Leading to these accusations we discussed aiding and abetting, potential obstruction. But as that Reddit chat showed, the legal consensus on whether her actions actually constitute a crime is, well, it's far from clear.
It's very much contested.
Highly contested and legally complex, yeah.
It really does highlight this tightrope walk for elected officials, doesn't it? Balancing being an advocate for constituents, maybe even all residents in their district, while also needing to strictly adhere to ethics rules, laws, regulations.
And dealing with very different interpretations of things like constitutional rights and just what the scope of a representative's duties actually covers.
Yeah. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Considering these different areas, the ethics questions around the gala, the intense debate over her immigration work,
How should public figures navigate that tension between advocacy and adherence to rules, and maybe more broadly, how do these kinds of incidents, both ethical and policy-related, shape public perception and ultimately trust in our elected officials?
it's definitely multifaceted. There are ongoing discussions and, like we said, no simple answers here.